Velyn is the best deputy mage in Call of Dragons, and in this video today, I'm gonna let you know exactly why he is so good. I'm gonna go over the best pairings you can do for him, who he goes with as deputy, and when can he be primary, as well as the best pets, artifacts, talents, and some really important tips on how to use him properly. Hey everyone, I'm Zoraz from Casuals. So first, today we're gonna be talking about Velyn's pairings. Who does he go with? And what kind of marches does he want to be in? Now, the reason I'm talking about this is especially because a lot of people are confused, including myself at times, because Velyn's primary is really not a good role, in my opinion, because of the talent trees that he offers. Magic and control, while they are both decent trees in the talent-wise, I find that the control is really just lacking in many ways. Now, it does offer a lot of utility, and I'm going to talk about the talents more. But in the majority of cases, Velyn is a highly specified damage dealing and damage dealing buff mage heroes in Call of Dragons. So obviously his main skill is a AoE of 1200 and it targets 2 other legions, so it's 3 targets total, which is, you know, a lot of damage on a lot of target, as well as slowing all these targets. Then he gets more hero damage dialed here and march speed bonus, which is great for mages. Then he gets crit rate, which is the only place you'll find skill crit rate on any hero in the game so far. And defense bonus, which is, again, decent. That's a lot of stats, you know, a lot of stats. And here is even more stats where he inflicts magic defense break and freezes on target at random intervals while he's fighting them. Reduces magic def by 20% and slows them for 20%. Again, now this, I don't think stacks with this one. They just, basically the enemies are just always kind of slowed against Velyn. And they have their defense reduced. He has more skill damage and he crits them more. It's just insane. And his awaken is where the really spicy stuff happens. Now, when he casts his rage skill on a target that's frozen, he does additional damage but removes the frozen effect. But this is the skill that apply freezes the most often. The thing is, usually he will cast his rage skill and apply freeze for 3 seconds. That means that by the time he casts his next rage skill, the freeze has run off. When you're looking at the awaken skill here, it is going to consume a freeze on the target to then do the damage extra, which is 400, which is a third of the damage his other skill does. So that's really good, especially if you're doing this AoE. Now, this is obviously a lot of damage to be done on enemies, but if he's a primary, it means he will cast his rage skill, apply freeze, and then consume no freeze, because the other time he casts his rage skill is way too far away. So this is why I don't find Velyn as primary to be very excellent. And this is obviously, there's ways around it. So I see interdiction is one of these skills that kind of like makes or breaks Velyn, because while he is in battle, he has a 20% chance to inflict magic defense break and freeze on the target. So this is 20% chance of what? We don't know. Auto attacking, casting a skill. It doesn't really say. I think it's every normal turn he has a 20% chance, which means that after 5 normal attack, he will definitely have done this. And the place here where it becomes tricky to know is how does this work in terms of the snowblind, the awaken, because if you are going to be having Waldir Velyn, it will always work. You will always trigger this. But if you have Velyn without Waldir, well, you will basically need Ice Interdiction to proc 2 or 3 seconds before it's Velyn's turn to cast a rage skill. This is obviously completely RNG, and when it happens, it's great, but you can't depend on it because it often won't happen. But in my opinion, the best pairing you can really have for Velyn is going to be Waldir primary and then Velyn secondary. Now, the reason for that being that in your situation with Waldir, you are going to be inflicting freeze as well. So Waldir is also someone who has a freeze for 3 seconds on his rage skill, meaning that he is going to be casting his rage skill, and then 2-ish seconds later, Velyn is casting his rage skill, consuming the frozen that Waldir applied, doing a lot of damage, and then applying frozen again, then slowing all the enemies for the duration. So this is obviously very good, and this is, in my opinion, the best way to have a Velyn march if you are going to have enough heroes to do multiple marches. Now, on top of that, with Waldir, he has the skill tree as well as the magic tree, which means that you can get things like Boiling Blood, which gives 8% more damage to the deputy's next skill. As we saw, Velyn does a lot of damage, and there's a lot of crit stuff here, which Velyn already applies crit, so having extra crit damage and more crit gives it even more value. So it's really hard to play Velyn without the skill tree, in my opinion. You're wasting a lot of his potential if he's not behind a primary who has a skill tree, which is why Waldir is so good, and with the freeze that works very well together, that's even better. But of course, Velyn is not stuck behind Waldir at all times. This is just one of the marches that does as well as Lilia Velyn in some situations. From what I've tested as a T4, I've had Waldir with Velyn, and then Lilia with like Tia, and then I've had Lilia with Velyn at times, and my Waldir Velyn almost always is at the same level as a Lilia Velyn or Lilia Tia, sometimes a little bit less, of course, because it's not as damaging in terms of the fact that Waldir is still a purple hero who does less damage, but for how close it is, considering he's a purple hero, it really shows how much it works, in my opinion at least. But of course, the other March, the ultimate Velyn March, would be Lilia Velyn. Now, Lilia Velyn is the #1 mage March in the game currently for war, merit farming. In general, it's not the best 1v1 March anymore. I've seen them be taken down by a few other mage marches, including Bertrand Tia with the right artifact and the right build. But in any case, if in this game you're going to be playing war, this is going to be a double AoE March, and it is the best and only March that does so much AoE on 2 heroes. And then Lilia has the skill tree as well, which, as we just said, is the best thing you can have on Velyn and on herself. So this is the ultimate March. Nobody's surprised by this. If you can only run one Mage March, this is the one you want to run. And if you want to run more than one Mage March, well, then you are going to have a lot of choices. So if we come and take a look here, this is, of course, as I said, the ultimate Mage March. If you're going to be running like 2 Mage March, this would be a very good setup. This is a setup that I personally am going to be running a lot this season, as it is 4 amazing Mage heroes with a lot of compatibility together. But if, for example, you do want to move things around, well, if you switch the deputies here, this is absolutely brutal of a March as well. So we're going to be putting Velyn with Bertrand as secondary, and then Lilia can have Tia as secondary. Lilia Tia is already a very good proven March. It works very well. It's obviously much better if you have Celestials as the unit type, as a human player, but in any case, it's still very good. And a lot of people don't seem to understand how good Bertrand Velyn is. Now, Bertrand obviously has a lot of really good skill and damage, and the damage that Velyn does activate his compound interest, so it is something you can play on a little bit. Sadly, the Awakened does not activate it, but still, you get at least 1 charge from this. If you're lucky, you can do, Bertrand's gonna cast his Rage Skill, get 1 stack of compound interest. Velyn's gonna cast his Rage Kit, get 1 more stacks, so you're gonna be at 2 stacks, and then by the time it's Bertrand's turn again, if you're lucky, because sometimes it works depending on the rage gain you have, sometimes it doesn't, you will be able to have the full 2 stacks, well, not full, but 2 stacks when casting Bertrand's skill, which means it's going to consume the 2 stacks. So this is a March that works really well in that way. But the reason it works especially well is because you get the defense break from Velyn, and you get the 10% hero crit rate from Velyn, as well as the 15% more hero skill damage and the March speed. These are all insanely amazing buffs for Bertrand. He does want defense penetration because he also has some himself. So that is a lot of penetration, and the skill tree that Bertrand has also has all the crit stuff. So the crit stuff becomes even more valuable with Velyn in the March, and he has the highest mage damage factor in the game. At Awaken, it goes to 1500 damage. Now that means he will be scaling way higher than any other hero if you're doing a crit. The crit is obviously a higher percentage of your base damage. So it is, in my opinion, one of the best mage March in the game currently. Bertrand Velyn is absolutely amazing. Now, as I said, if you are going to be running 3 mage marches, here is where you're going to be having the Waldir come in, and this is what I also am going to be running this season a little bit. So in this situation, you are going to be running 3 mage march, and this is where you're going to have to use your favorite neighborhood cow, the Tohar March. He still enables Bertrand very well, making it so that Bertrand shines, which if you invest in Bertrand, it's still going to be a March that does very solid damage. So this is, in my opinion, the other best setup in order to have 3 mage marches, which is what a lot of people will be trying to run if you're free to play or low spender, or if you're focused into mages. This is 3 mage marches that are on a very high power level. None of these marches are weak, and all of these marches have the potential of bringing very similar amount of merits. And you're going to do way more merit with 3 marches if you're careful not to get targeted than you are with 2 marches, even if the 2 marches are better. So this is really powerful, and this is exactly my setup for the season with the pets and the artifacts. And if you really want to put Velyn as a primary somewhere, you can do it with any of those marches, or otherwise, something you can do, you know, some people have been doing is, you know, Velyn with, not with Emrys, with Indis, because then become more of a supportive march. Of course, you're going to be running control tree on Velyn, which is a supportive tree. So this is going to be, you know, one of these things that could work. There's a lot of different things you can do. Velyn really just works with anyone. It doesn't matter who you put Velyn with. As deputy is the best spot, but you really can put it anywhere and he will shine. He is just the best mage hero in my opinion, because not anything on his skill is bad. Every single thing about him is good. Everything works. He is just amazing. Now, if we come and take a look at the talents, as I said, Velyn is really better as a secondary, so you should not really be having a talent tree for him as your main priority. Now, you are going to be doing well enough if using the magic tree. The magic tree is not bad at all. But for example, I've seen a lot of people talk about iconoclasm, which makes it so that when you gain a buff, you do 2% more hero skill damage. So this is like a 10% damage. When you gain buffs, this is up all the time. The season talents are giving buffs, so this is kind of something that's up, like at an uptime of like 100% now in this season. And you know, there's a lot of ways to gain buff in this game, including from talents. Bertrand gains buffs like every turn. So there's a lot of things where iconoclasm is very good. But the magic tree, otherwise, you know, this is a 5% extra damage, which is really decent, but it's the same as any of these trees, you know. And then here, I don't really love this. You have to take skill damage to have a chance of inflicting defense break on the enemy, which lasts for 3 seconds, which means that you might not even cast your skill by the time this is up. And then this is less skill damage, so it's very defensive. It's not bad. Like the 5% magic defense reduce is good. He already does a lot of magic reduce himself though. But in any case, you know, it's really not bad. It's just not as good. The options here, you know, it's all very defensive. I find it's all very passive. There's a chance of getting a shield here, which is good when you're with Tia, but otherwise, you know, it's very small. And a lot of people seem to forget, well, iconoclasm, you know, it's 10% skill damage here, and let's say 5% extra damage here. Everything else is very mid-tier. Well, when you compare that to, for example, the skill tree, well, just here you have 8%. 8% damage. This is the last talent of the magic tree, and it's 10% after gaining buffs. This is just 8%. The normal attack damage you do is so low on mages, it has no point. You don't do normal attack damage. Mages don't do that. They do skill damage. You're gonna do 200 damage attack normal, and then your skill gonna hit for 10,000. Like, it's completely pointless. 8% skill damage versus 10%. This is the first tree of the second tier. Like, it's really kind of close. There's 2% difference. Now, we said this is 5%-ish. Well, there's, you know, 4% here. So it's not like you're getting very different. And then here, this is something that can give you 8% damage as well. Now, it's not going to be 8% all the time, but 8% here is higher than 10% here and 5% here. And then on top of that, like, this is just the percentage of skill damage. We're talking about focus, which is something that's up very often, and crit rate of 10%, which is increasing your damage tremendously, on top of Velyn already having crit. And then the crit damage here, 15%, which, as we said, if you're getting all this crit from Velyn, well, you're getting a lot of crit damage here. So this is why you kind of want skill damage, skill tree to be the primary of Velyn, because they're just, the bonuses are too good. And then not talking about the boiling blood, which is another 8% damage on Velyn's skill. And as I said, these things like Cage Animal, it's not something that's up at 8% all the time, but it's up by a few percent regularly. Otherwise, you have another 120 damage factor here, which is, you know, 60 per hero in your march. Velyn does, you know, 1200 damage, while 60 is 5% of that. So this is a 5%-ish amount of damage bonus, right? So I don't know in what world anyone would think that the magic tree is anywhere near better than the skill tree. It's so far bad, it's so far worse, it's not even close. Now, a lot of people are testing doing 1v1s, which means absolutely nothing in this game. So in 1v1, maybe the magic tree performs better. But in war, in a situation where you're doing a lot, there's no way. Like, the skill tree is just that good. So again, if you're playing Velyn and you want merit, don't touch anything but the skill tree. Put him as a deputy and have the skill tree. That's just my opinion, but it's just, I don't find it anywhere close. If you're going to be using magic, just put him deputy and use skill tree, because it's just not good in my opinion. Now, if you're going to be using control, on the other hand, you will do less damage by far than someone with a skill tree. But what you will gain, while there is, you know, a little bit of damage, rage gain here and a little bit of skill damage here, the big benefit of the control tree comes from the reticent last ability, basically, meaning that you have a chance of silencing target. So this is obviously 25% chance, so it's not happening a lot, but he does hit a lot of people with his rage skill. And silencing is something that's really good, because if you silence an enemy that's like at a full rage bar for 2 seconds, it is definitely something felt. And We know we've talked about this already before. Bertrand, you know, it's compound interest. If you have it up, it's basically like 1 second or 2 before it expires when he casts his rage skill. You know, there's a lot of little skills like that where the deputy or the main hero are kind of like on a cooldown before they cast their skill, meaning that they're gonna delay their rage. By that time, some of their buffs are gonna fall out. Also just delaying their damage in general. There's a lot that can be done here. This is still very RNG because you could be silencing a hero that's at 0 rage, so they're not even feeling it. Which is one of the reasons I like it less, because RNG here is really going to make it better at times and really bad at other times. But in a supportive role, AoE silencing enemies is never going to be bad. It has a really, really strong effect, and this is really powerful. And it is really going to be worth going control tree for that. You're going to sacrifice a lot of damage, but you're going to bring a bonus to your team and basically nerf the damage of the enemy. Now, in this control tree, there's also quite a few good things. Sage, in my opinion, is one of the best things because you have a 50% chance gain synergy when you inflict a debuff. You inflict debuffs all the time. The freeze that he inflicts is the debuff, so it's all the time. You're always debuffing. If you even look here, basically he gains more damage when he debuffs. That's just how it is. He's a debuffer. He freezes and slows and magic break and all kind of stuff. So this is up all the time. 5% hero skill damage. So this is very good. Again, 5% here is nothing compared to the 8% in the skill tree plus the 8% here. But you know what I mean. But it's still a decent amount at least. And then you have things like here where you are gonna apply more defense break, which is going to be obviously good because he's applying defense break for anybody. So all your allies are also going to be hitting for more damage. So I do think these two are very good. This one is not bad. I put 1 point in it because you just basically want to cast the debuff. Even the percentage is on like it's 1% to 5%. It's good. It could be something really good, worthwhile to invest in because debuffing enemies is always great. But I only put 1 point because you always have a point extra when you're level 60, and the 1 point will mean that he inflicts more debuffs, which will trigger his Sage skill and his other skills more often. So this is something that's, you know, decent. And then here you have a rage gain, which can be decent when you're taking rage skill damage, which means you're getting AoE'd, which happens a lot in war. But it's pretty, you know, 10 seconds. It's pretty like long before each other. And then this is like movement speed related. So I prefer these two in my opinion. And then in this lane here, this is very, very good. Blindside. Your Legion instantly slows the enemy for, I think, 30% as soon as they enter combat, and it lasts for 10 seconds. So this is something that I would really think about putting many points in if you're going to be the route of the debuffer, the slower, the CC'er. This is amazing because you're debuffing them instantly. As soon as you attack them, you're slowing them, which means your ally can catch up and stuff like that. You don't need to cast your freeze. And then this also is higher percentage than the freeze, so it goes over the freeze. It cancels the freeze. I don't know if it removes the debuff though, so that's something to test, but in any case, otherwise you have 4% skill damage, so this is very good. So in general, this tree is very decent. It offers really good debuffs and really good utility, but in terms of the Velyn March himself, as a damage dealer, he will be very weak. He will be losing out on all the crit damage, all the skill damage, all the crit rate, you know, only to gain a little bit of skill damage, a little bit of defense penetration and a silence. So, you know, it's not bad. It's just, in my opinion, not the best. And then you have choices here depending, you know, this is not good. I would never take Cyclone Seal because the slow is 15%. His slow is 20% from casting his rage skill, so it overrides this. So this is a wasted talent if you're putting it here. So I would definitely be putting it in Soul Siphon, which is bad because you're never really counter-attacking, but, you know, it's the only choice you have, which is another reason why I don't like the control tree, because I find these two very, very underwhelming. And then here it's just the basic stuff. You don't really have a choice. Just get the best things, which is, you know, the rage and all that kind of stuff. So these are kind of the talent choices. Again, the recap is use a primary with a skill tree. And if you need the skill tree build, look at my Lilia or Bertrand video. I go into full details about the skill tree, the best build you can do. And if you really want to use Velyn as a primary, then I would recommend the control tree. But I still think you're wasting a lot of his value. He has way too much buffing and damaging capability to be used as a debuffer and a CC'er. He could be doing so much more with a skill tree March. Or by himself with Walder as a primary is just so much better in my opinion. So this is what I think. Of course, not everybody's going to agree, but this is how I would see Velyn in my opinion. Now, artifacts are very straightforward because they're the same for every mage heroes. Now, the best artifact on Velyn, in my opinion, currently I think it's Phoenix Eye. Of course, I'm putting it on Walder because Walder is running the Velyn March. But this is very high damage, works really well with the AoE that they provide, has the best stats you want. Now, Infernal Flame, not really good unless you're doing Lilia Velyn, then it's great, it's amazing, it's actually the best. If you have Lilia on your March, Infernal Flame is always the best, simply because of the buff that it provides. It's just too good. And if Velyn is secondary, this buff is great for him as well, so it's amazing. So if you have Lily as primary, Infernal Flame. If you have any other primary, then I would do Phoenix Eye or Mirage Orb, which is completely good as well. It's obviously more of a Bertrand made artifact, but there's nothing on this that is not good for Velyn. But the one thing to keep in mind is that you're gonna have to need a hero with him. So it's going to be, I think, Bertrand or Tia to be able to trigger the additional effect, which is going to be basically gaining a buff of up to 27% in my case, or 45% in Max case. So you gain a buff every time you apply a buff to yourself, and then this stacks 3 times, and then you get the maximum damage. This lasts forever, and you will have it up anytime you cast your artifact skill in combat, usually because it takes a while to load up the artifact. But you really need someone in your march to be able to cast a buff. So Bertrand's Compound Interest does it, and Tia's skill, it applies synergy when she gives her shield. So she'll basically need to cast 3 skills, and then you'll have a full buff, which usually she will be casting 3 skills before you cast your artifact, so it will work. So you're going to be running, in that case, Bertrand Velyn with the Mirage Orb, amazing. Bertrand Velyn with Phoenix Eye, also amazing. Or otherwise, you're going to need to be doing like Velyn Tia or Tia Velyn, which I don't recommend, but it would work, and the Mirage Orb would be good. But in any case, this is really the option. Lilia primary, Infernal Flame, any other primary, Phoenix Eye, except if you're doing Bertrand primary, then Mirage Orb. And even if you put Phoenix Eye here, it's still fine. And even if you put Infernal Flame here, it's really not that big of a deal. It's just better on Lilia. So this is really your choices. And then, of course, the Magic Bomb, if you have no other choices, if you have Legendary Artifacts on other marches, the Magic Bomb is never going to be bad. It offers the right stats and offers damage, so there's nothing bad about it. So these are all your choices. And the other place here you can use some Breath of Gargantis is going to be if you're doing a supportive Velyn with the control tree. Well, this is a supportive artifact, and it does apply more defense break debuff to the enemy. So this would be another place where people could bring a Velyn. Velyn support with whatever secondary you want. It could be Tia, it could be Indis, it could be Waldir, it could be really anyone. Waldir is also very, very good secondary in that situation. And then you have a lot of defense break. You have defense break from the talents in the control tree, and this is just a good artifact as well. So these are all basically your choices if you are going to be running Velyn, depending on where you want to run in. Now, moving on to the pets for Velyn. Now, the Ice Lizard is, of course, considered, the pet mate for that march. The reason is that this skill basically summons an Ice Orb around the Legion, and it deals damage to 1 Legion. I think it can go a bit higher for 3 seconds. Meaning it also applies Frozen, which is a weaker Frozen than the Velyn Waldir ones. It's 15%, not 20%. So their Frozen overrides this one. But if you do not have Frozen in the enemy and you want to consume it for Velyn's Awaken, this does work. It does consume the Frozen and apply more damage. So it is a very good pet for Velyn. But in some situation, the casting animation of this pet makes it so that Velyn's rage skill is delayed a little bit. So basically meaning that between the time the Ice Lizard casts his spell, it kind of delays the animation. Now, I've tried to test this, and it seems to have been fixed, but it's not something that's easy to see because it always is different, because pets kind of cast their skill quite like delayed. In any case, I do think it works, and I don't think it's bad at all, but the damage is extremely low, and if you're using Waldir as primary, you don't actually really need this at all. And in any situation, no matter how good all of this Frozen and all kind of stuff is, it's really hard to beat the Sapphire Fade Rake, because Sapphire Fade Rake does so much damage and it's AoE. So Sapphire Fade Rake usually ends up being a better pet for any of these marches. And specifically, if you have a Waldir Velyn march, the Ice Lizard could work. Or if you have, a march that doesn't have a Waldir and you don't have the freezing effect, and you do want to apply the Awaken, this is a march that could work with the Ice Lizard. The Ice Lizard is definitely something that is viable on Velyn, but in general, if you're running Bertrand as primary, if you're running Lily as primary, you're going to be a bit better served by having your Sapphire Fade Rake with the Pain Bloom, or your Shadow Fade Rake for Bertrand specifically, especially if you have a good one like mine. It does, add up considerably. It's not like that Ice Lizard is bad, it's just, it's more situational, and it really is just about triggering the Frozen for Velyn. In my opinion, it can be good, and if the thing where it delays the skill cast is fixed or has been fixed, then it's much better than it used to be. But currently I've seen a lot of conflicting reports, so I don't want to give bad information. So it is something that's decent, viable, but in general, you're going to be better served by having a Sapphire in the first place. On your Lilia Velyn, for example, it's going to just do more damage and give you more. You will still be able to apply the Awaken for Velyn in certain ways. It's not always not applying because, it still works and you don't really need the Ice Lizard always. Plus the Ice Wizard is kind of delayed when it casts, so it doesn't mean that Frozen will be up. So it's a bit of a clunky pet and needs a little bit of work. But in any case, these are your two options. The Sapphire Fade Rake, always good. Never any questions to ask. It always works, always does good damage. And you need really, really good pets of the other kind to beat the Sapphire, while a really random, normal, not even that good Sapphire will perform very, very good. It doesn't need to be really good. As opposed to like a Shadow Fade Rake, it needs to be insanely good to replace a Sapphire. Then it's better, but it needs to be that good. Otherwise, a Sapphire is better at equal stats, in my opinion. Now, my last tip for Velyn, of course, it is a tricky hero to use and there's a lot of options for him. But the one thing, obviously, his Awaken is amazing, but he is also a gold chest hero, meaning that you can get him from the gold chest here. So it is a hero that's a little bit hard to invest in, because I wouldn't recommend people go and spend tons of token on Velyn. Like, for example, if you're spending all of these kind of tokens on Velyn, well, it's a bit wasted, because as you see, my example, I didn't spend any of these tokens. I only bought, you know, the daily pack and stuff. And I got Velyn maxed out in season 2. Now, I have 55 Velyn token in my inventory that do nothing, because my Velyn is Awakened. So I've gotten 55 tokens from the gold chest over and over, and there is no point. Every time I roll, I open a gold chest here, and I get a Velyn in this screen. Well, every time, that's a waste, because I don't have anything to do with it, and there's nothing in the game yet. It is coming. It will be something eventually where you can recycle them. But as you can see, you know, it does end up being wasted, and you have it in your inventory and there's no point. So this is something you do have to be careful when you invest in him. His Awaken is really worth it, but it is something that's worth waiting for and get him from the gold chest slowly but surely, because without his Awaken, he's still amazing. So this is just something to keep in mind for him that way. So that's about it for my Velyn hero guide for Call of Dragons. Let me know what you think. How do you use Velyn? Which March? What is your opinion on Velyn? In the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.